Okay, great. Hey guys, I'm Cheka Mendis. I'm currently coaching Ananda College, and I'm here to discuss the motion from the NMP Memorial Challenge Trophy from round 5. That this house prefers the narrative that you can never totally know yourself over the narrative that emphasizes the need to find yourself. Okay, great. A lot of people hate this motion. And truth be told, I was one of them. Because this sort of motion is incredibly hard to justify, the limits of the debate can go literally anywhere, and for good reason both judges and debaters tend to dislike it. That said, you're going to get debates like this, you're going to get motions like these throughout your debating career. And narrative motions are an important part of debating in general. So I think it's a good lesson for all of us to go and take a closer look at some of these motions and see how you can clarify them and make the debate more fun for everyone as well as easier for you to win. Okay, great. So let's start with the elephant in the room here. How exactly do you define something as vague as finding yourself? I'll give you 2 examples of the teams that in the debate that I judged and the methods that they used to define them. The proposition team tried to claim that finding yourself means doing your utmost or putting your greatest effort into something, at least initially. And, well, there are obvious reasons why that's straight up not true, and for a great example, like working really, really hard at your job cannot be classified as finding yourself. Whereas an opposition tried to go on a different definition of, hey, look, finding yourself means trying new things or meeting new people, and again, while that does work, does trying out a new hobby really always mean finding yourself? Is that the full definition? There are interesting questions to be had here. And you're not going to find a definition that's going to satisfy everyone, especially in this kind of debate. So what you're supposed to do is use examples to frame the debate in such a way that no matter what definition you choose, it's going to make more sense. And the way you do that is by taking an obvious example and trying to identify whether that means finding yourself or not. Again, let's take the earlier one. Does working really hard at your job really mean finding yourself? Probably not. Does a young school child going to a new art class, does that really mean him finding himself? I don't think most people would say that. So, especially for opposition, what you would want to define finding yourself to be is to say it's something that's seen as spiritual. Like when you say finding yourself, what comes to mind is like people going on spiritual journeys or like uprooting their own life to find new things or going out of their usual routines to find something new. That this is the vibe that comes with finding yourself. And as both teams can benefit from looking at how these sort of vibe of what finding yourself looks like in people's minds and finding ways to shape that. For a side that wants to show finding yourself is bad, aka proposition, you want to characterize this as something negative, right? It means like a bunch of people on YouTube or, I don't know, Facebook or Instagram showing pictures of them on their vacations and saying, oh, I went on my spiritual retreat and I know how to work my life out now. Or this notion that like that your life is unsatisfying unless you do some deep spiritual introspection about it. And as proposition, the easiest way you can point out why that's wrong is that it's inherently self-centered, right? There are good arguments you can make about how it's impractical, about how it usually takes up time and resources and messes you up that way, but I do think the strongest thing that proposition can make is that the reason why you can never truly know yourself is because people are too complex like that. And the way that people find their purpose tends to be in unpredictable ways. And if I was going on top, and this is more of a question of personal opinion than something I'd advise for every team, I would say that being able to find your own sense of identity is inherently connected to other people. In other words, if you're like studying at a school, the better chance to make your own identity is maybe going and having a new hobby or meeting with your friends rather than like going on a trip out in the middle of nowhere or like following some spiritual guru, right? And that it's the things that you go through in everyday life and the goals that you create that truly define your sense of identity. And trying to artificially look for your own identity in outside methods is something that's always going to hurt you in the end and stops you from finding the things that truly make your life meaningful. And the reason why I think going with this sort of route is better for most teams is because opposition does have a very strong point in that without introspection, people will end up going with whatever other people want. In a sense, without the ability to find yourself, you're just going to go with what life tells you it should do. I mean, you're going to do the job your parents want you to do. You're going to be influenced with your friends to do what they want. That without a sense of identity, you aren't a person. And I do think for opposition, that's a very powerful thing for you to say. You could say, look, sure, maybe finding yourself, doesn't mean you have to go out to the Bahamas or to, a Buddhist temple and meditate or whatever. That's not always necessary, but that finding new things, opening yourself up, looking into yourself spiritually, that those are things that help you find out who you are and make you more independent from these outside influences. That sure, meditating won't solve all your problems, but you can't say it doesn't have benefits for you either. And the culture that this creates is far, far better than the alternative of a materialistic culture that, says that, what you gain purpose through the stuff that you have, and that's bad. And this is a very important point, that in general, narrative debates, or when you're debating narrative debates, can be very, very useful. Figure out the counter-narrative. For opposition, the most powerful counter-narrative you can claim is that in the absence of a narrative of finding yourself, people are materialistic, people follow other people's own wants and desires instead of figuring out what they want, and basically go on a whole tirade about how that's bad and leads to you having a worse life. Whereas on proposition, again, you need to be characterizing finding yourself as self-centered bullshit that doesn't really take into account or help you find the stuff that you're naturally going to go with. If you're a basketball player, I don't think going out and meditating, maybe that's a bad example. But if you have, if you live in a city or if you have certain hobbies and stuff, sometimes it's in those things that you can find your sense of purpose. Sometimes it's in helping the homeless people in your town around you rather than looking up spiritual blogs and trying to figure out what your sense of purpose is going to be. That these different narratives help you define what finding yourself is if you cannot come with a concrete definition. That's why framing is always something that can help. Now, framing in general is good for debates, okay? I've had some of the best first speakers I've ever known tell me that you can win a debate in the first speech through framing. And framing in this case means shaping how the judge and how the other team thinks about the debate. If you claim that finding yourself means listening to stupid social media gurus, that's going to be how the judge and the other team sees it for the rest of the debate. And you can naturally see how outside of arguments and rebuttals, if that impression of what the debate is going to look like stays in people's minds, then you're always going to have an advantage moving forward. And in narrative debates, where everything is based on vibes, framing is especially important. And using good examples or using powerful language to change that ultimately means that you can win the debate, again, from the first speech alone. So again, when you're making narrative debates, when you're doing debates like this that don't have any concrete limits, you want to use a sense of vibes or general impressions to change the way the judge sees the debate in a way that makes it advantageous to you. But okay, right. So we've already characterized what the two different viewpoints of how finding yourself could look like. Now let's ask a separate question of how these sorts of rebuts are going to go through, what are the general lines you can do as the clashes go through the debate. I think an important thing that both sides need to keep in mind is that with narrative debates, everybody's going to be pushing the same benefits. So if there's any benefit, if there's any harm that ultimately differentiates you from the other team, you want to emphasize that immediately. I think, for example, one of Pop's strongest points is that when you're finding yourself, that's an additional cost to time and money that you could be using for other things. Like that going on a spiritual retreat, you can probably use those resources better, or doing on the things that you actually love and care about, right? And using that sort of benefit, you can definitely push the other side into making some good concessions. Whereas there are ways to rebut this, obviously. I think the most obvious thing that opposition can do is simply tell me that, like, look, in the absence of us having this kind of spiritual awakening or introspection, people are just going to spend that money on useless things that don't bring them any joy. But the point is, look for those types of interesting clashes that you know the other side probably doesn't have much to respond to. And again, this is the kind of debate where being creative and thinking outside the box will help you a lot. Let me see if I can come up with any other examples that can help clarify this a bit. I think another great line of argumentation you could push is to say that on opposition that, like, again, pushing the counter narrative, saying that, like, look, if you don't have this idea that you need to find yourself, what impetus does somebody have to try new things, right? And to argue that when you really can't know yourself, like, why would you want to, like, what's the push that leads to you for you to look for what you love in the first place? And I think this is where we get at the point where we've discussed what it means to find yourself to death. And because I've literally spent so much time talking about why you need to look at the motion carefully and characterize everything as best as you can, let's ask the simple question of how prop can characterize the idea that you can never know yourself. The easiest and simplest way to do that is to just say that, like, you live your life in a norm, that you don't do introspection for the sake of introspection. That is, you don't want to go on a spiritual journey for the sake of it, but that you do so for a purpose, that you help others because you want to help, and that you find a new hobby because you enjoy it, not because you think that new hobby is going to teach you something new about yourself. And again, I suppose I keep going through these sorts of topics because teams just tend to have a very bad job of really characterizing what they look like, and most importantly, what they do that the other side doesn't. And I think that's probably a good final note to end this on. Weighing. Teams are very bad at weighing. I don't blame them. Weighing is extremely hard. Even if you look at world scores debates, they tend to not have a ton of weighing. It's because weighing is essentially taking 2 points, saying, if both of these are true, why does this thing matter more than this thing? And that's not always easy to justify. But in narrative debates, weighing is extremely important because everybody's after the same benefits and everybody's pushing after the same harms. If you cannot weigh these things out, you're basically asking the judge to, like, make that judgment themselves. And you never want to do that, because what a judge will be thinking about is, oh, I want to end this as quickly as possible, it's lunch next round, or I don't like this kid in his stupid glasses, I might as well, give the clash to them. Like, if you don't give the judge a reason to side with your version of the world or some kind of weighing, then you're just leaving things up to chance. And do you, as a debater, really want to leave things up to chance? So how do you weigh these sorts of narratives? Again, the key point, and I do say that the magic words for weighing is even if, right? Say that, look, let's take for example on proposition, that even if the spiritual journeys and finding yourself takes away this need for, like, materialism or, like, looking for outside things to give you happiness, that, like, look, we still win because of the fact we acknowledge that some materialism is a part of life, that, like, because, like, this finding yourself assumes a lot of privileges that it just does not want to admit. The privilege of being able to take time to make those new hobbies or take time out to go on this spiritual journey. And by packaging it as something that isn't built around material resources, you make people feel bad when they don't want to have it. Even if on our side, we still have people we have the alternatives, people wanting, like, lots of money or chasing after new cars and stuff. There's no push that this is somehow spiritually superior, that this is something that you can attain and have to be able to attain. And again, weighing like that is something that will immediately make the judge want to side with your side of events, even if they don't personally buy your weighing. Because a judge always wants to make their own job easier, and even if their personal opinion doesn't go with you, that they will appreciate the fact that you tried to simplify the debate, that you tried to get to acknowledge both points and give him a reason to care about yours. And that's why weighing is always going to be the winning factor inside a debate, because of the fact it shows to the other side that you're really trying to explore the debate, you're willing to take the other team at their best. And I'm saying, as a judge, there is nothing more impressive than that. And similarly, the worst thing you can do as a debater is to look at another team's points and not give them the weight that the judge feels that they deserve, or dismissing them, or just calling them stupid, or pretending to rebut them, actually rebutting a weaker version of their point. There's nothing more insulting to a judge than that, because it means that you're not debating the debate as best as you can. You're making it less fun for the judge, and you never want to do that. Okay, so yeah. I hope you guys learned something today, and yeah. Have a good day, night, whenever time you guys are watching this.